The last two episodes of Soccer Files have taken us through 1994 in the formation of Major League Soccer. The league launched in 1996 and was originally set to start in 1995. 1994 was a big year for American soccer history with the World Cup here. It also saw a little bit of a setback on the professional league side, but by the end of the year, things were looking very good going forward. You had agreements with a number of cities, although the final lineup for the league was not quite sorted out yet. You'd even acquired a few players in a deal where the San Francisco Bay Blackhawks contracts were assumed by the league. Things were looking good, but 1995 would not be completely smooth sailing as the league was getting ready for year number one. We'll take you through the first half of 1995 as Major League Soccer prepared to launch in this episode of Soccer Files. Welcome back. My name is Jason Longshore. Thanks for listening to Soccer Files on the Soccer Down Here network. Let's get caught up. There was a press conference in November of 1994 where some announcements were made. Funding was ready to roll. You had John Kluge, who was listed as the third richest person in the United States, involved in the league at this point. Stuart Subotnick and Kluge were going to run the New York, New Jersey franchise. Lamar Hunt was admitted into the league. He would get a team to pick where he wanted to be because of the respect for Lamar Hunt. LA, Washington, investor operators were involved at this stage. There were still a few question marks about all of the cities that would be involved and what maybe that next wave would look like with expansion. I ended the last episode with a quote from Alan Rothenberg, and I want to use it again here to kind of set the table for what the beginning of 1995 looked like. Rothenberg was coming off of a very successful World Cup that, in a lot of ways, shocked the world. There were people expecting the World Cup to be a failure. FIFA had high hopes, but maybe a lot of question marks involved in it. It was an unmitigated success, and even today holds up as one of the most successful World Cup tournaments. Alan Rothenberg, talking about Major League Soccer coming after this for him, said, "Believe me, there's been many a time I thought after World Cup that I should just declare victory and go on to something else. But there's two parts to why I want to stay on and make MLS work. One is the sense of responsibility. The game plan from the beginning was to use the World Cup as the catalyst to build a first division professional league here. And it became pretty clear that if I didn't take the lead in doing it, it wasn't going to happen. The other is that I guess I've always enjoyed a challenge in my life, both from a business and a professional standpoint. And I'm sure nothing is going to be more challenging than this." He was correct. He was correct in that. It was a very challenging birth to Major League Soccer that is celebrating its 25th season right now. By April of 95, and we're going to jump around a little bit topic to topic. It's not going to be straight chronological this time around. But by April of 95, the final financing was in place to launch in 1996. That was one of the reasons the league was delayed. It was one of the reasons why things were a little murky at different points. By the time you got to June and you were able to actually lay out which cities were involved, which teams, how many teams, et cetera, Hank Steinbrecher, the United States Soccer Federation General Secretary, told Jer Longman at the New York Times on June 2nd, "There's definite reason for optimism. Before the World Cup came, I can't remember a press guy saying it was a good idea. We wouldn't fill the stadiums, we'd go into debt, there'd be violence in the streets. All accounts were wrong. Those same voices are saying MLS can't get off the ground. Soccer is dead. They will have to eat crow twice. If the definition of success is 50,000 people in the stands and taking the nation by storm, we'll be very disappointed. If you're looking at 10,000 people on average to get the product on the shelf and increasing the market share every year, then the league can be successful. June 3rd, Boston Globe, Will McDonough wrote that all the key financial heavy hitters made it official and agreed to put up $5 million per team to ensure the league would get off the ground. That happened on June 2nd. Chicago was still listed at this point as one of the initial teams. Now, they got pushed back to 1998. Paul Anschutz would own a team in either Denver or Dallas, according to Will McDonough. He said Chicago was in. He said it'd be either Denver or Dallas in for 96, and we know that it ultimately was both, and Chicago had to wait. McDonough wrote that the season would consist of 40 games, playoffs, and a championship game. Ended up getting pared down just a little bit from that. McDonough also said that an average of 20,000 fans per game was projected with an average ticket price between $10 to $15 per ticket. That 20,000 average was never the expressed goal of MLS in year one. And you go back to what Hank Steinbrecher said. They were looking to start modestly and grow from there. I think maybe some in the media expected it to come in with a big bang and grow from there. And that's difficult to do, especially now that you're looking at launching in 96, almost 2 years after the World Cup. The press conference in New York on June 6th is what really set the table for season one. They announced the 10 cities for 96. They announced that there would be a $1.3 million salary cap, a pool for transfer fees. Teams could use revenue streams from sponsors, a 32-game season. $75 million of capital commitments were on the table per Frank Delapa of the Boston Globe. Dentsu, a sports marketing company from Japan that Alan Rothenberg was seeking out for quite a while, they attended the press conference. They committed to the league. Budweiser was announced as a sponsor. At that announcement, 7 teams had investor operators day one. 3 were league operated. That was Tampa Bay, Dallas, and San Jose. That's the structure. That's the not quite as fun stuff. Let's get into players and kind of how things progressed there. In early 1994, Tony Meola and Alexi Lalas were very outspoken about wanting to play in the league when it was announced. Alexi Lalas, after the World Cup, went on loan from the U.S. Soccer Federation to Padova in Serie A. He had an out clause in his contract to come back to MLS when it was supposed to launch in 1995. That ended up getting delayed. Tony Meola played indoor soccer. He spent the 1995 season in the USISL with the Long Island Rough Riders. That Long Island Rough Riders squad in 1995 had Meola, had Chris Armas, had Giovanni Savarese on it. That's a pretty star-studded team for 95 in the USISL. All of those guys ended up coming into Major League Soccer. Tab Ramos was the first official, is one way to put it, signing on January 3rd. There were players under contract. Remember, the San Francisco Bay Blackhawks contracts were assumed by the league in late 1994. Ramos was the first standalone signing. It was a little bit of an interesting situation as he was going to sign in Mexico with Tigres. Sunil Gulati heard about this, knew that he wanted to come to Major League Soccer, knew that Ramos was looking at a deal that would give him flexibility to come back to MLS when it launched. So he said, why don't we do it this way? We sign you, and then we loan you to Tigres. And they ended up getting it done. It was, the beginning of maybe some interesting flexibility when it came to contracts in MLS. At that time, Tab Ramos said that he was guaranteed to play in either Washington or New York. The second and third players to sign with the league happened in late January. Todd Yeagley and Brian Mazanov both played at Indiana University, led him to a runner-up finish in the 1994 NCAA tournament. Mike Burns was next in late February. Lawrence Lozano was signed after that. Desmond Armstrong signed a contract in early March, the 6th signing in league history. It was reported as a 1-year contract. He ultimately never played in MLS. In 1995, he at one stage was going to sign with the Atlanta Ruckus of the APSL. That ended up not coming to fruition when they had some ownership troubles, and Armstrong never played professionally after that. Paul Bravo was the next signing. He played in 1995 in the USISL with the Monterey Bay Jaguars in Salinas, California. USISL teams in 95 had a lot of talent. That Jaguars side had Bravo, had Jeff Beitcher, had Paul Holliker, Mark Simeoli, David Kramer, all future MLS guys. March 1995 is when Jorge Campos first expressed interest in joining the league. That's a whole nother saga when Campos got signed and some of the promises that were made to get him to sign, and then very fancy cars that had to be purchased for him to stay in the league after game number 1. Jorge Campos was a very important name at the beginning because he brought a lot of excitement, a lot of credibility, and a lot of buzz in the Latino market. And that was something that MLS was really going after at the very beginning of the league. Peter Vermes signed a multi-year contract on April 5th, 1995. He played in the USISL with the New York Fever. Two players that MLS was interested in signing at this stage, Claudio Reyna, Joe Max Moore. They signed contracts in mid-April with their German clubs for the 95-96 season. Reyna re-signed with Bayer Leverkusen for a reported $600,000 salary with $400,000 potentially available in bonuses. Joe Max Moore was transferred from the U.S. Soccer Federation to Saarbrücken for $250,000 after spending the 94-95 season on loan. Joe Max Moore ended up coming back to the league in 1996, or coming to the league for the first time. It took Claudio Reyna a little while longer to get to MLS. Gene Harbor, one of the leading scorers in the leagues between the North American Soccer League and Major League Soccer, he signed a multi-year contract on April 28th. Harbor was born in Nigeria, had experience with the U.S. men's national team, was a leading goal scorer indoors and out. By 1995, he was the all-time leading scorer in the APSL with 66 goals, 42 assists. Played in the Summer Indoor League, the Continental Indoor Soccer League, with the Seattle Sea Dogs in 1995. The Tampa Tribune reported that Tampa Bay Cyclones of the USISL, their forward Peter Isaacs, was signed by MLS in May of 95. Carlos Valderrama was another one of those big chase episodes for Major League Soccer. They really wanted Valderrama, who became I think a widely known figure in the United States after the 94 World Cup. Yes, his hair had a lot to do with it. He was also one of the best players from South America at this time. The league started chasing him in a big way, and that started in May of 95, and the Tampa Tribune reported on it then. Tampa was always at the forefront of chasing after Carlos Valderrama. May 24th of 95, you saw a flurry of signings. Jeff Duback, goalkeeper, Mike Lapper, and Kurt Analfo, defenders. Analfo played on loan with the Connecticut Wolves of the USISL through July. Then he was loaned to León in Mexico. Another defender, Tom Sohn, Chad Ashton, a forward. It's very interesting out of that group. 3 ended up managing in the league in Analfo, Sohn, and Ashton here recently with DC United. Miola was still out there. He had expressed interest in joining the league day one. He was playing in the USISL. He told The Record in New Jersey that he had not talked to anyone at Major League Soccer about specifics by May of 95. Little surprising that MLS left Miola kind of out there on his own. Jorge Campos told the LA Times that he signed a 3-year deal with Major League Soccer to play in Los Angeles. He also said that he would play in Mexico. His quote to the LA Times, and this was prior to that big June 6th press conference in New York, he said, "It is something very special. I don't consider myself a missionary. I'm just part of what will make the league work." Reportedly, Major League Soccer paid Pumas a roughly $2 million transfer fee. He was expected to be introduced at the big June 6th press conference in New York with a follow-up press conference in Los Angeles on June 7th. At that June 6th press conference in New York, it was announced that Tab Ramos would play for the New York, New Jersey club, which was at that time known as the Empire Soccer Club. That was what they were going by. That's what they were referred to at that point. Of course, that ends up changing down the road, but that was what the club was called, and they had their first player assigned to them on June 6th with Tab Ramos. A couple days after the big press conference, Kobe Jones, another one of the stars of the 94 World Cup for the U.S. men's national team, he was linked with signing with the league by Michael Lewis in the Daily News. A 19-year-old from Chile, Carlos Farias, he was the MVP of Southern California's Super League. He signed on June 13th along with Peter Isaacs, who ended up signing with MLS and then being loaned to the Tampa Bay Cyclones of the USISL. Those deals were made official on June 13th. June 25th was the big one from a U.S. perspective at this time. Alexi Lalas signed a multi-year contract with Major League Soccer. He was going to play for Padova in Serie A for the 95-96 season and come to MLS when his season was done. Lalas' quote at that time was, "You got to take a chance. If with my participation I can help the game of soccer in this country, that's great." He said at that time he'd like to play in Boston. That wasn't nailed down yet. That is ultimately where he was assigned to. He visited Boston a little bit later in the year on August 3rd before the Parmalat Cup at Giant Stadium. And Frank Delapa, also of the Boston Globe, reported that Padova would release him whenever their position in the league was secured. You got to remember, Padova was not a huge club. And once they were out of the relegation zone and secure, they were going to let Lalas come back to MLS. That ended up working out very well, time-wise. Frank Delapa also on June 30th reported that New York, New Jersey, at this time the Empire Soccer Club, was pursuing Milan's Roberto Donadoni. This was another one that kind of shook the world up a little bit because you've got Valderrama, who was also being pursued, and Delapa followed up on that. You had a couple other Colombian players that were being pursued by the league. Donadoni got some attention in Europe that MLS is not just coming in and throwing some teams together. They were actually going for some names that were a little bit surprising at this point. The second half of the year is where you really started to see the business pick up on names signing with the league and things to come. But you can tell by the first half of 1995 that there were some big things in place already with Jorge Campos, with Alexi Lalas, already on board that got a lot of media attention. I think were critical in that first half of the year in keeping MLS front of mind for local media in different markets, but also the national soccer media. All right, let's get into the team side of things, some of the off-the-field stuff. You had a blueprint in place by the end of 1994. That blueprint did go through some alterations in the first half of 1995. Let's get caught up a little bit. Fort Lauderdale Strikers were a team and a market that MLS was very hungry to bring into the league. They decided to sit out the 1995 APSL season early in the year. Rothenberg had been in conversations with Amancio Suarez, the owner of the team, their primary sponsor, Wayne Huizinga of Blockbuster. Those conversations started in the middle portion of 1994. They were continuing. The Strikers decided to sit out the 95 APSL season. And we've talked about the APSL and their designs on being a competitor for MLS. Their 1995 season had a lot of hiccups. Fort Lauderdale deciding to sit out was maybe the first of those at this stage. Discussions, and we mentioned the Empire Soccer Club, discussions about what that team name would be for the New York, New Jersey team obviously included the name Cosmos. Now, there were a couple things in play here because of some of the agreements. At the very, very beginning, there were going to be two separate teams, a New York team and a New Jersey team. The New Jersey team was always slated to play at Giant Stadium. The New York team was going to play on Long Island. That ended up not coming together, so those groups merged together. Now, this was part of a deal that was struck with the New Jersey State Legislature to play at Giant Stadium. The team name had two possibilities. It had to be either neutral, no location mentioned, like Empire Soccer Club, or it had to include New York, New Jersey. It couldn't be just a New York name. That was part of the deal that the New Jersey State Legislature struck on Giant Stadium. So that made it a little more challenging. Cosmos was one of the names that was bandied around. I believe Pepe Penton still had the rights to the name. Don't know if any conversations were had about price tags for it at that stage, but nothing happened with it. MLS had a very, I think, strong stance at this stage of not embracing the old North American Soccer League history. There were still some, I don't know if open wounds is the best way to put it, but there was still a lot of fear that the NASL was looked at as a failure in the sports media, and they didn't want to attach to that. Now, it took a while, but once MLS, I think, became a little more solidified, they felt like they could embrace the NASL in certain markets, and we see named now that harken back to the NASL days. That was not the case at the very beginning of the league, and it was a very conscious effort to avoid anything NASL-ish at that point. Alan Rothenberg met with Nassau County officials in mid-March about possibly building a 16,000-seat stadium in Mitchell Park, Uniondale. That was for the Long Island team. Now, it's back and forth, and this is something that probably needs some clarification because at this stage in soccer reporting, you would see different stories from different writers in different parts of the country that in a lot of ways contradicted one another. The idea about the Long Island team and the New Jersey team being completely separate until they were kind of merged together is one side of it. There was also the idea in early 1995 that the Long Island team was just on hold and the New Jersey team was just moving along separately. When they actually became a joint entity is a little hard to follow. But Alan Rothenberg, Major League Soccer, were working and even spending some money on efforts to build a stadium in New York proper. When you wonder how it's been so difficult for New York City FC to build a stadium, MLS has been at this game since before the league started. It was never an easy situation. It still isn't. It sounds like New York City is about as close as MLS has ever been to getting a stadium done in New York. April 22nd, Lamar Hunt made his announcement that he would officially commit $5 million to invest in the league. He would control 51% of Columbus and Kansas City. He said his first interest was Kansas City. Obviously, he was the owner of the Kansas City Chiefs as well. But he was enticed by what was happening in Columbus with over 11,000 season tickets sold. He created a new entity, Hunt Sports Enterprises, that was created for the soccer business. Columbus committed to playing at Ohio Stadium for 2 years with an option for year 3, but they were already looking at building a stadium at this point. They were really one of the first to, I think, have real designs on getting a soccer-specific stadium built. At this stage, mid-95, they were looking at a downtown site of the former Ohio Penitentiary. May 9th, there was a report in the Chicago Tribune that Denver was more likely to get a team for 1996 than Chicago. One of the reasons was a local investor had not surfaced in Chicago yet. There were also reports that were linking South Florida to an expansion team as early as 1997. May 20th, a few weeks ahead of that big announcement in New York, Robert Kraft told the Boston Globe, "They are very close to announcing something, and we've agreed to be part of it. We're excited about it. There are some great people in other towns who are involved. There's a time in business when you realize that if it is going to happen, it is time to act. We have a lot on our plate now, but the people in the region have shown they will support soccer. Mentioned Denver as a replacement for Chicago. Dallas was mentioned as a replacement for Chicago as well ahead of that press conference on June 6th. Chicago had a couple of issues. The local investor operator was one. Also, there had been off and on yes-nos back and forth with Soldier Field. It was looking more like a no at this stage. So Chicago had to be put on the back burner. Kansas City, Dallas, and Colorado were the last three sites that were announced on June 6th to complete that inaugural list of 10 teams. Originally, it was going to be 12, ended up with 10. On June 7th, Los Angeles was reported as playing at either the LA Coliseum or in Orange County. The Coliseum was reportedly planning for 20 MLS games at the venue in 1996 by the end of June. This was seen as kind of vital for the Coliseum because the Raiders were going back to Oakland at this stage, and they were looking at MLS coming in and replacing some of those dates. Ended up not happening. Phil Anschutz was announced as the investor operator in Denver. Alan Pasco, Inc. was announced as the investor operator in Washington. That was according to Frank Delapa in Boston. It was the local affiliate of the sponsorship group of the United Kingdom, Alan Pasco, Inc. New York, New Jersey was still negotiating with the New Jersey Sports and Exposition Authority in June about having grass at Giant Stadium. The Sports Authority and the Giants and the Jets had the final say over what the field surface was going to be. They used temporary grass for the World Cup, obviously, and it was announced for the Parmalat Cup at Giant Stadium in August that they would use temporary grass. Lamar Hunt gave a little more detail on his involvement in the league on June 7th, said that he would pay $4 million for a 51% stake in the Columbus team, with the remaining 49% to be split among several local investors, and they'd put up between $80,000 to $400,000. Ron Pizzuti was announced by Lamar Hunt as the lead local investor in Columbus, with him putting up $1.52 million of the estimated $8 million startup cost of the team. The Columbus Dispatch, local newspaper, sponsored a contest to name the team, and another one of those local investors was Dispatch Printing Company. Finish up with some odds and ends that were floating around in early 1995. Some of the branding for the league and for the teams. Nike was heavily involved in this, and they were focused on creating merchandise that would sell. Frank Delapa of the Boston Globe said that Nike was also involved in placing Jorge Campos in Los Angeles and Tab Ramos in New York, New Jersey. Mentioned the Name the Team contest that the Columbus Dispatch was involved in. More would come from that, but you saw some teams go down that road. You saw others where Nike or Adidas or other entities were involved in naming the team. Reebok was the uniform supplier for New England, and they were in the process of designing them. The team name was going to be selected in a contest with fans starting in August. Frank Delapa reported that Reebok was going to be the sponsor for New England. Also reported on June 30th that Reebok was going to sponsor Washington. Now, that ended up not happening. Adidas was set at this stage to sponsor Columbus and Kansas City, which they did. They ended up getting Washington as well. Puma had Denver. Nike had Dallas, Los Angeles, New York, New Jersey, San Jose, and Tampa. The only one of those from Frank Delapa's report at the end of June that changed was DC going from Reebok to Adidas. And I don't know if that story's ever really been told as to why that changed. Ultimately, Adidas was pretty involved in DC's branding, and they had one of the best brands from the very beginning. It was one of the more traditional brands with the name DC United and with uniforms that, were simpler at this stage. So lots of conversation about what the brand should be, what American soccer should be branded like. And I don't think anybody really truly knew in the mid-'90s what that should be. And we've seen A few things change from that time. The New England Revolution logo is the only one that is still the same from day one, launching the league in 1996 until today. And now I think it'd be really hard to change it. It'd be really difficult to go away from the iconic American flag, red, white, and blue look. Let's move on to coaches and front office staff and personnel. A lot of this picked up later in the year, but there were some things moving in the first half of the year. Farouk Qureshi was the second general manager hired by the league. He was named GM in Tampa Bay in early February of 95. He had played for the Rowdies in the NASL, venue director in Orlando during the World Cup, gave the mutiny, or eventual Tampa Bay mutiny, they hadn't had that name just yet, gave Tampa Bay some credibility in the market. That was a very important hire day one. April 14th, 1995 was an interesting day in American soccer. That's when Bora Milutinovic was let go from the U.S. men's national team. He said at that time that he would be interested if a job was offered to him in Major League Soccer. He eventually did manage in Major League Soccer, but it was not a direct route to get there. Qureshi told the Tampa Bay Tribune that in May he had preliminary talks with Thomas Rongen, former Fort Lauderdale Strikers player, was involved in coaching in the state of Florida. They had conversations at a preliminary level in May. Carlos Alberto, name that was known worldwide, Brazilian legend, played for the New York Cosmos. He was an assistant coach for the Nigerian national team at US Cup 95. He told reporters at that time that he would be interested in working in Major League Soccer. Danny Villanueva Jr. was named the president general manager of the Los Angeles franchise on June 29th. His father was the president of the LA Aztecs for their final 4 years. Tim Latta, who spent 11 years with the San Diego Sockers, one of the most successful indoor soccer franchises who had come out of the old North American Soccer League, Latta was named the GM of Kansas City on June 30th. He was 35 years old. He joined the Sockers front office when they were in the NASL, started in the sales department, then became the PR director, then the media services director, then the director of broadcasting before becoming the general manager in 1992. Current San Diego PR director Jim Morehouse was announced as joining him in Kansas City in early August. Many of the coaching hires and other front office hires came in the second half of 1995 as teams got closer to hitting the field. One other sidebar at this time, and this was going on throughout 1994 as well, was there was an idea that Major League Soccer would try a bunch of crazy different rules experiments, and there was a lot of back and forth in how much they should try. Sunil Gulati, later, looking back at Major League Soccer, he told Complex Magazine that the league had an agreement with the USISL at this time, and all of the different divisions in the league, which was the third tier below the APSL at this stage, he wanted to use them to do different things. So Gulati said, what we did in 1995 was run a number of different experiments, basically with different rules in each of those divisions. It was kind of a controlled experiment. In one USISL division, they had bigger goals. In another division, they had a different set of rules. Phil Woosnam, the earlier commissioner of the North American Soccer League, coach in Atlanta with the Chiefs, coached the U.S. men's national team in 1968. He oversaw that experiment. So they kept statistics. They observed all the games in all the 8 divisions to see what they liked, what they didn't like. There were some that were off the wall. There were a few things that made it into MLS at that time. I think they were looking at kick-ins instead of throw-ins. They had the situation where when a team committed a certain number of fouls, the opposition would get like a 40-yard run at goal with players starting 10 yards behind, and when the whistle blew, everybody started running towards the goal. So you better pick somebody who was fast and could outrun everybody and with the ball at their feet and also make advantage of that 10-yard head start. bonkers. I'd love to see a video of this if anybody has it. That one didn't quite make it to MLS. That one wasn't really looked at very favorably. Let's look at the other leagues that were going on. Again, the backstory here. MLS was selected as the Division I professional soccer league in December of 1993. One league, League One America, which was a proposal, it wasn't even really a traditional soccer league, never got off the ground. The other league that applied was the APSL, the American Professional Soccer League. They were not very happy about not getting the Division I sanctioning. They were fairly combative throughout 1994 with some pretty bold statements about what their future plans were. Richard Groff, who had run against Alan Rothenberg for president of the U.S. Soccer Federation, he became the commissioner of the APSL late in 1994. There were statements made about how they planned to have 12 to 16 teams by 1995. They had 7 in 1994. Well, it went down to 6 when the Fort Lauderdale Strikers decided to sit out that 1995 season. Other updates in the APSL early in 95, the team that had been announced for Detroit never materialized. Los Angeles, the Los Angeles Salsa, which had been one of the more successful teams in the league, they pulled out of the league around that same time. Their owner, William De La Pena, he was very outspoken against MLS. He was trying to get the LA Salsa into the first division in Mexico. There was a lot of back and forth about what that would look like. Ended up not coming together. The Salsa played in the USISL in 1995. Toronto was set for the APSL for 1995. They folded right before the start of the season. I actually have Atlanta Ruckus ticket stubs for games against the Toronto Rockets, which didn't happen. They ended up reusing them for a different game as they had to redo the schedule at the last minute. The league did add the New York Centaurs along with the Atlanta Ruckus, who'd been announced in 1994. The Ruckus almost didn't make it to opening day. They struggled to post the $100,000 performance bond and ultimately had to go through an ownership change to get that done. Several teams struggled to post that $100,000 performance bond. The Salsa mentioned them playing in the USISL in 95. Paul Caligiuri signed with them to play. When he wasn't playing with the U.S. men's national team, he played for the LA Salsa in the USISL that year. The USISL, to kind of show the difference in level, they were charging a $2,500 franchise fee for 1995. Operating expenses ranged between $65,000 to $80,000 for a 5-month season. This was all coming from the Valley Golden Eagles owner John Campbell in the LA Times in April of 95. Francisco Marcos, at this point, he had started the league for the USISL in Texas. He was planning to move the headquarters to Tampa Bay, where it still is today. He had also convinced the Tampa Bay Cyclones to move up to a full season in 1995. There were organizational problems with the Atlanta Magic. They needed one more team in the Southeast. The Cyclones moved up to a full year. The Magic, that ownership group was what joined the APSL as what ended up becoming the Atlanta Ruckus. They were going to operate the Magic as a reserve team in the USISL when everything fell apart financially for the top team. Of course, it fell apart for the secondary team as well. There was talk about finding new ownership for the Magic. They ended up playing a couple of games in 1995 and then folding for the outdoor season. They went on to play one more year of indoor and try to defend their USISL indoor title, and that was the last we saw of the Atlanta Magic in the winter of 95 going into 96. Before the season in 95, the APSL rebranded itself as the A-League. They had a national TV contract with Prime Network, 18 games plus 2 playoff games. They had a national sponsor in Umbro. The season kicked off on May 5th. And Richard Groff told The Record in New Jersey that he wanted the A-League to be a Division I league sanctioned by U.S. Soccer by 1997. The USISL had a number of new teams come in 1995 at lower budgets, lower operating expenses, and a couple of those teams that came in were the Louisville Thoroughbreds and the Cincinnati Cheetahs, who played at Deer Park High School in the Cincinnati area. Salaries in the USISL peaked near $2,000 per month, plus living costs that varied market to market. Just to get a sense of USISL, the Milwaukee Rampage, one of the more successful teams in the league, they employed 2 coaches and 4 front office staff year-round. The 25 players were only paid during that 5-month season. De La Pena moving the LA Salsa from the APSL to the USISL. He also moved them down to play in South Orange County. He said he lost several $1 million running the team. Some sources said it was close to $2.5 million. The 1995 Salsa budget was around $350,000 for the year. In 1993 in the APSL, for example, he was paying players as high as $60,000 a year and not making a whole lot of money in that league at that time. De La Pena maintained his territory rights to Los Angeles for the A-League, and he had the option to rejoin the league in 1996. The 95 season for the Salsa, they ended up averaging about 1,000 people per game. In 1995, the USISL started their plans to add an elite division, which would be applying to be recognized as Division II, which would put them at the same footing as the APSL, the A-League. They had those plans to apply in mid-August to U.S. Soccer. The Tampa Bay Cyclones were one who were rising up the ladder at this point. They were one of about 20 teams that applied to play in this new division. They were very good on the field, one of the top teams in the USISL, going 17-3 in the regular season. They also drew around 1,000 fans per match. On August 24th, William De La Pena was announced as a part owner of Mexican club Atlético Celaya, which was a club that was in the first division in Mexico, ultimately crashed and burned later on. He was trying to find a way to stay involved, and he did not want anything to do with MLS, and he ultimately didn't find a way to revive the LA Salsa either. This was his way to get into the Mexican League like he tried to do with Salsa. Worked for a little while. Late August, the Select League of the USISL was announced. 24 teams, and they were targeting being declared Division II. The teams that made it to this level in the USISL going into the 95 season were the Albany, New York Alley Cats, the Connecticut Wolves, based in Hartford, the Cape Cod Crusaders, the Delaware Wizards, the Greensboro Dynamo, who you probably know a little bit better as the Carolina Dynamo, the Hampton Roads Mariners, the Long Island Rough Riders, the Richmond Kickers, New York Fever, Raleigh Flyers, South Carolina Shamrocks, Tampa Bay Cyclones. Out west, not too far west, you had the Birmingham Grasshoppers, Chicago Stingers, El Paso Patriots, Los Angeles Salsa, Milwaukee Rampage, Minnesota Thunder, Monterey Bay Jaguars, New Mexico Chiles, New Orleans Riverboat Gamblers, still one of the best names ever in American soccer history, the Reno Rattlers, the Sacramento Scorpions, and the St. Louis Knights. This level of the USISL was set up to have a salary cap between $50,000 to $75,000 per year, and that depended on the market. Plus, they could have 2 marquee or international players exempt from the cap. Now, MLS at the beginning had their cap. They had players who were exempt from the cap. They didn't really publicize it. They didn't do that until the designated player rule came into effect in 2007. But the USISL under Francisco Marcos was the first to really come out and say, we're going to allow marquee players to be signed outside of the salary cap to add a little bit more juice to the league. That was where that idea started. I don't know if Marcos thought that it would end up with the signing of a David Beckham as the first player under that kind of a rule. That's what happened down the road. Bill Ward wrote in the Tampa Tribune at the end of the year that teams were paying $15,000 to $20,000 to join the USISL. They also, the USISL, recently signed a 1-year deal with Umbro for 7 figures in apparel and cash, mostly in apparel. Umbro had the A-League as well. Umbro also was involved in Major League Soccer. Umbro was huge in this country in soccer in the mid-'90s. All that changed over time, but they were very strongly linked to all of the different leagues in American soccer in 1995. So next time on Soccer Files, we will finish up 1995. Lots of players were signed in the second half of the year. Lots of coaches were hired in the second half of the year. Front offices were filled out. There was the whole idea of naming these teams, because not really anybody outside of the Empire Soccer Club, which didn't last, had a name at this point. So you had a lot of things that happened in a very short period of time in the second half of 1995. We will try to get through all of that next time on Soccer Files. I'm Jason Longshore. Thank you for hanging out. As always, if you have questions, if you have comments, if you have videos of that Charge of the Light Brigade thing from the USISL, send them our way at Soccer Down Here on social media. You can send it to me directly at Longshoe. We'll keep digging into more MLS history next time on Soccer Files. Thanks for listening.